My name is Alyssa, and on my 29th birthday, I sat alone at a table for six in Seattle, waiting for a family that never came. Instead of my father walking through the door, a stranger approached and dropped a heavy envelope onto my dinner plate. It was not a gift. It was a formal cease and desist order and a termination notice, signed by my dad. They were accusing me of the exact fraud I had exposed just days ago. My phone buzzed. It was a notification from my sister, Isabella. A photo of my empty office. The caption read, "Taking out the trash. #new era." Tears were an inefficiency I couldn't afford. I just ordered the bill. Drop a comment and let me know if your family served you legal papers on your birthday. Would you cry or would you fight back? I want to know who is in my corner today. I didn't open the envelope at the table. I didn't need to. I knew exactly what it said because I knew exactly who they were. I paid for the sparkling water I hadn't touched, left a generous tip for the waiter who looked concerned, and walked out into the cool Seattle rain. My hands were steady. My breathing was even. The panic I expected didn't come. Instead, a cold, sharp clarity settled over me. It was over. The years of fixing their messes, of cleaning up their legal disasters, of being the safety net for their reckless ambition. It was all over. Inside the sanctuary of my car, I pulled out my phone. Calling them would have been a tactical error. Begging for an explanation was beneath me. I opened the company's admin portal. My access was still active. They were arrogant. They assumed I would be too devastated to think straight, or maybe they just didn't realize how deeply I had embedded myself into the system. I executed the kill switch I had programmed months ago as a failsafe. With one tap, my personal cloud drive disconnected from their servers. My emails, my contact lists, my proprietary financial models, everything that belonged to me and not the company vanished from their network. Then, I remotely wiped my laptop and tablet, ensuring they couldn't plant anything on my devices. Finally, I secured the doomsday file. It was an encrypted folder containing every email, every invoice, every falsified land deed I had uncovered in the last week. I moved it to a secure offline drive. They wanted a war? They just handed me the ammunition. I started the engine and drove. I didn't go home. I drove past the Sterling Development's headquarters, a glass and steel monument to my father's ego. The lights were on in the executive suite. They were probably celebrating, toasting to their cleverness, getting rid of the problem. As I passed the employee parking lot, I saw it. My reserved spot, the one closest to the door, the one I had earned after 5 years of 70-hour weeks. It was gone, painted over with black tar. A fresh, wet square of darkness where my name used to be. That wasn't a panic move. You don't get a paving crew out on a Tuesday night on a whim. This was premeditated. They had been planning this for days, maybe weeks. While I was agonizing over how to save them from the audit, they were ordering paint. While I was losing sleep trying to find a legal loophole to protect Jada, they were drafting my termination letter. I laughed then. A short, sharp sound that startled me. It was funny, in a sick, twisted way. I had spent my entire life trying to be the perfect daughter, the reliable one, the fixer. And all it got me was erased. I wasn't a person to them. I was a function. And when that function became inconvenient, they simply deleted me. I turned away from the building and drove into the night. I wasn't going to break. I was going to survive. And then I was going to make them wish they had never painted over my name. People ask me why I stayed. Why I gave 10 years of my life to a family that treated me like a spare part. The answer isn't simple. It wasn't just a job. I was the architect of their survival. For a decade, Sterling Developments was the face of luxury real estate in Seattle. My sister, Jada, was the golden child, the closer. She walked into rooms with $1,000 shoes and a smile that could sell ice to a polar bear. She brought in the deals. She brought in the investors. But I was the one who made sure the buildings didn't fall down. I was the fixer. When Jada promised a skyscraper on land that wasn't zoned for it, I was the one who spent weeks at the city planning office, finding the loopholes, filing the variances, smoothing over the cracks in her impossible promises. When my father, Edward, over-leveraged us on a vanity project, I was the one who restructured the debt, moving money around like a shell game so the payroll checks wouldn't bounce. I lived in the shadows of their spotlight, convinced that being indispensable was the same thing as being loved. But you can only hide the cracks for so long before the foundation gives way. It started with a single line item, $85,000. It was labeled simply, consulting fees, paid to a vendor I didn't recognize. In a company moving millions a month, 85 grand is a rounding error. Most CFOs would have signed off on it and went to lunch. But I knew every contractor, every supplier, every consultant in the Pacific Northwest. I didn't know this one. I pulled the thread, and the entire tapestry unraveled. That $85,000 wasn't a fee. It was a test to see if I was watching. When it went through unnoticed, the floodgates opened. I found invoices for lumber that was never delivered. I found payments for architectural drafts for buildings that were never designed. But the kill shot was the land. Jada had been buying phantom land. She was creating paper trails for plots of land in rural Oregon, swamps, essentially, appraising them at 20 times their value, and having the company buy them from shell corporations she controlled. It wasn't just skimming off the top. It was a gutting. $15.5 million over 3 years. She was hollowing out the company from the inside, turning our legacy into a shell game to fund her lifestyle. I sat there in the blue glow of my monitor, staring at the evidence of my sister's crime, and for a moment, I didn't feel anger. I felt a profound, crushing sense of shame. Not for her, but for me. Why was I still here? Why had I spent a decade cleaning up after people who would steal the copper wiring out of the walls if they thought they could sell it? I realized then that I had been wearing an invisible chain my entire life. It is a psychological concept called learned helplessness, but in a family dynamic, it looks a lot like loyalty. I had been conditioned since I was a little girl to believe that my worth was tied to my utility. I wasn't the pretty one. I wasn't the charming one. I was the useful one. I believed that if I just fixed enough mistakes, if I just saved them one more time, I would finally earn my place at the table. I stayed in that burning house because I thought my job was to hold the roof up. But looking at Jada's signature on those fraudulent deeds, I finally understood. I wasn't holding up a roof. I was hiding a crime scene. And I was done being the accomplice to my own erasure. I thought leaving was the hard part. I thought walking away from the Sterling building in the rain was the end of the war. I was wrong. It was just the opening shot. The next morning, I didn't wallow. I didn't stay in bed staring at the ceiling. I put on a suit. I updated my resume. I was 29, and I had single-handedly managed the finances of a multimillion-dollar real estate portfolio for 5 years. I knew the market. I knew the regulations. I assumed that even without my family's reference, my work would speak for itself. I applied to 3 rival firms. These were companies that had tried to headhunt me in the past, people who had bought me drinks at industry galas and joked about stealing me away from my father. I sent the emails at 8 in the morning. By noon, I had 3 rejections. They weren't the standard, "We'll keep your application on file," auto replies. They were personal, brief, cold. One of them, a VP at a firm in Bellevue who I had known for years, simply wrote, "Alyssa, given the circumstances surrounding your departure, we cannot move forward. Best of luck." Circumstances. The word hung in the air like smoke. I hadn't told anyone why I left. I hadn't gone public yet. How did they know there were circumstances? I opened my laptop and searched my name. And there it was. It wasn't on the front page of the Seattle Times. Nothing that loud. It was subtler. More insidious. It was on a popular industry blog, Pacific Northwest Realty Insider. The headline read, "Shakeup at Sterling. CFO ousted amidst internal audit." I clicked the link, my hand gripping the mouse, so hard my knuckles turned white. The article didn't name me directly, but it didn't have to. It cited anonymous sources close to the family. It claimed that a rogue executive had been terminated for mental instability and gross financial irregularities. It painted a picture of a jealous, unhinged daughter who had snapped under the pressure and tried to sabotage the company from within. I knew that voice. I knew the cadence of the sentences, the specific buzzwords used to discredit a woman in power without ever technically lying. Emotional volatility, erratic behavior, personal crisis. It was Isabella, my younger sister, the PR manager. While I was driving away in the rain, she hadn't just been posting selfies. She had been working the phones. She had been calling her contacts, planting the seeds, spinning the narrative. She wasn't just protecting the company, she was salting the earth. They were making sure that if I ever tried to speak up, I would already be discredited. Who would believe the mentally unstable embezzler over the prestigious Sterling family? My phone buzzed. It was a text from my mother, Crystal. Alyssa, we want to help you. Dad and I are willing to offer a severance package. 6 months salary. Full health benefits. We can even pay for a treatment facility if you need time to rest. All we need is a signature on a non-disclosure agreement and a public statement apologizing for the misunderstanding. Please, honey, let us take care of you. I read the message twice. A treatment facility. They were doubling down on the mental breakdown narrative. They wanted to pay me to agree with them. They wanted to buy my silence and my sanity for 6 months of rent. It wasn't an olive branch. It was a golden handcuffs deal. If I signed that, I was admitting guilt. I was agreeing that I was the problem. I looked around my apartment. It was quiet. It was small. But it was clean. It was mine. And it was built on the truth. If I signed that paper, I would lose the only thing I had left, my name. I didn't reply to my mother. I didn't call the blog to scream. I felt a cold, metallic calm wash over me. They thought they had cornered me. They thought that by taking away my job and my reputation, they could force me back into line. But they had made a critical error. They assumed I was still playing by their rules. They assumed I wanted to save my career in this town. I didn't want a career in this town. I wanted justice. I picked up the hard drive containing the doomsday file. It felt heavy in my hand, heavier than plastic and metal should feel. It was a bomb. And they had just lit the fuse. I wasn't going to look for another job. I was going to find the one person in Seattle who hated my father as much as I did. I dressed for a funeral. Not a literal one, but the energy was the same. I put on my sharpest charcoal suit, the one I usually saved for board meetings where I had to deliver bad news to investors. I pulled my hair back tight. I checked the hard drive in my bag 3 times. I wasn't going to the office. I was going to the federal building downtown. I had an appointment with a senior investigator at the Securities and Exchange Commission. I stood on the sidewalk outside the glass doors of the federal building, watching the reflection of the city behind me. I knew what walking through those metal detectors meant. Once I crossed that threshold, there was no going back. No Thanksgiving dinners, no reconciliation, no fixing this. I was lighting a match and throwing it into the engine room of a ship my grandfather built. Alyssa. The voice was low, gravelly, and terrifyingly familiar. I spun around. Leaning against a concrete pillar, looking like a statue that had aged 10 years in a week, was Arthur. He was my father's attorney, the family pitbull, the man who had drafted the non-disclosure agreement my mother tried to make me sign. If Arthur was here, he was here to threaten me. He was here to tell me that if I walked into that building, he would bury me in litigation until I was 80. I gripped my bag tighter. If you are here to serve me more papers, Arthur, you can give them to the federal agents inside. He didn't sneer. He didn't pull out a lawsuit. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a single, manila envelope. It wasn't thick. It was terrifyingly thin. I am not here to stop you, he said, his voice flat. I am here to give you the missing piece. I frowned. I have everything. I have the land deeds. I have the invoices. You have the what? Arthur said. You don't have the when. He held the envelope out. I hesitated, then took it. I opened the flap. Inside was a single memo, dated 5 years ago. It was a transfer authorization for $2 million. It was signed by Jada. But right below her signature, there was a countersignature approving the emergency allocation to cover the loss. The signature was my father's. Jada didn't start stealing 3 years ago, Arthur said, lighting a cigarette even though we were in a non-smoking zone. She started 5 years ago, right before the initial public offering launched. She embezzled $2 million for a condo in Aspen and a gambling debt. Your father found out. My breath hitched. He knew? He knew, Arthur confirmed. But we were weeks away from going public. A scandal involving the CEO's daughter would have tanked the share price. So, Edward didn't call the police. He didn't fire her. He used the company's emergency reserves to plug the hole. He covered it up to save the IPO. He made himself an accomplice to save his ego. The world tilted on its axis. All this time, I thought my father was just blind. I thought he was a victim of Jada's manipulation, a soft-hearted dad who couldn't see his golden child was a monster. I was wrong. He wasn't the victim. He was the architect. He didn't fire me because I was incompetent. He didn't fire me because he believed Jada's lies. He fired me because I was getting close to the one secret that could send him to federal prison. He sacrificed me to keep his own skeletons buried. Why are you giving me this? I asked, looking up at Arthur. Because I am retiring, he said, dropping the cigarette and crushing it under his expensive loafer.
Today.
Effective immediately. I am not going to prison for Edward Sterling. He is on his own. He turned and walked away, disappearing into the morning crowd of commuters. He didn't look back. I stood there, holding the paper that proved my father never loved me. He only managed me. The grief I expected to feel didn't come. Instead, a cold, hard fury crystallized in my chest. It was the final tumblers of the lock clicking into place. They hadn't just betrayed me. They had used me as a human shield for 5 years. I turned back to the federal building. The glass doors slid open automatically, inviting me in. I wasn't just a whistleblower anymore. I was the executioner of a legacy that deserved to die. I walked through the doors, placed my bag on the scanner belt, and didn't look back. The fallout didn't happen all at once. It was a slow, agonizing demolition, like watching a skyscraper collapse floor by floor in slow motion. The first domino fell within 48 hours. The Securities and Exchange Commission froze Sterling Development's assets pending a federal audit. That meant payroll stopped. Vendor payments stopped. Construction sites across the city went silent, the cranes standing still like metal skeletons against the gray sky. Then came the headlines. The Seattle Times ran the story on Sunday morning. Legacy developer accused of massive fraud scheme. Sterling family empire under investigation. I sat in my apartment, drinking black coffee, watching the comments roll in. The public didn't just turn on them. They devoured them. People who had been priced out of neighborhoods by Jada's gentrification projects, contractors who had been squeezed on invoices, environmental groups who had fought their rezoning efforts. Everyone had a story. The Sterling name, once a golden ticket in this town, was now toxic. Jada tried to run. Of course she did. She booked a private charter to a non-extradition country, probably thinking she could live off the offshore accounts she had stuffed full of stolen cash. But she didn't make it past the tarmac. Her passport had been flagged the moment I handed over the doomsday file. She was detained at King County International Airport, still wearing her designer sunglasses, protesting that it was all a misunderstanding. Isabella tried to fight back online. She launched a counteroffensive, posting tearful videos claiming the family was being targeted by a bitter, disgruntled former employee. She tried to spin me as the villain, the jealous sister who wanted to burn down what she couldn't control. But the internet is a cruel judge, and it loves receipts. I didn't have to say a word. The court of public opinion did the work for me. Anonymous accounts started leaking stories about Isabella's bullying tactics, about the hush money paid to silence critics. The toxic whisper campaign she had started against me boomeranged back, hitting her with 10 times the force. She deleted her social media accounts 3 days later. My parents were trapped. They were sequestered in their sprawling mansion on Mercer Island, a gilded cage that was rapidly losing its value. Federal agents were appraising the art on the walls, the cars in the garage, the very furniture they sat on. They were watching their entire identity being tagged and cataloged for auction. The winter rain turned to sleet, coating the city in a layer of ice. It felt fitting. The warmth, the luxury, the invincibility of the Sterling family was freezing over. I kept to myself. I didn't give interviews. I didn't gloat. I went to the grocery store, I went for runs in the cold air, and I watched the news like everyone else. It was strange to see the people who had defined my entire existence reduced to talking points on the evening news. They looked small on the screen. Ordinary. Just people who had made terrible choices and were finally paying the price. I thought I would feel triumphant. I thought watching their empire crumble would feel like victory. But mostly it just felt heavy. It was the weight of a tragedy that didn't have to happen. If my father had just been honest 5 years ago. If Jada had just been satisfied with enough instead of wanting everything. If my mother had cared more about her children's character than their public image. We could have been a family. A real one. Instead, we were a case study in greed. The silence in my apartment was profound. No frantic texts demanding I fix a zoning issue. No passive-aggressive emails about missed deadlines. No late-night calls from Jada needing bail money for a DUI I had to cover up. Just quiet. And in that quiet, I started to hear my own voice again. It wasn't the voice of the CFO, or the daughter, or the fixer. It was just Alyssa, and she was ready to build something new. But first, there was one last door to close. It was almost midnight when the pounding started. It wasn't a polite knock. It was the desperate, frantic hammering of people who had never been told no in their lives and were suddenly hearing it from the entire world. I didn't rush. I walked to the door, checked the peephole, and saw them. Edward and Crystal Sterling. My parents. They looked like ghosts. My father, who never left his bedroom without a tie, was wearing a wrinkled tracksuit. My mother, whose hair was always a perfect, lacquered helmet, looked like she hadn't slept in 3 days. They weren't the titans of industry anymore. They were just scared. Old people standing in a fluorescent hallway. I opened the door, but I didn't step back to let them in. I stood in the threshold. A barrier they couldn't cross. Alyssa, my mother gasped, reaching out. Thank God. You have to help us. Jada, they are talking about 10 years. 10 years in federal prison. We can fix this, my father interrupted, his voice shaking. We know you have the files. You know where the bodies are buried. You can tell them it was a clerical error. You can restructure the debt. We will give you the CEO chair. We will give you 50% equity. We will give you everything. I looked at him, really looked at him. Even now, standing in the ruins of his own making, he thought he could buy me. He thought my integrity had a price tag just like his did. He didn't want a daughter. He wanted an accomplice. He wanted the fixer back because the golden child had broken something he couldn't glue back together. I can't fix this, Dad, I said, my voice calm. And I wouldn't if I could. How can you be so cruel? My mother sobbed. We are your family. We protected you. Protected me? I laughed, a dry, humorless sound. You fired me on my birthday to cover your tracks. I reached onto the entry table and picked up the thin file Arthur had given me. I held it up. I know about the first $2 million, Dad, I said. I know about the cover-up 5 years ago. I know you aren't the victim here. You are the architect. My father's face went white. The last shred of his bravado evaporated. He looked at the file, then at me, and he saw the one thing he never expected to see in my eyes. Indifference. I already gave this to the investigators this morning, I said. There is nothing left to fix. It is over. There was no space in the timeline for their begging or their screams. I closed the door. I locked the deadbolt. And for the first time in my life, I felt completely safe. The end came swiftly after that. Sterling Developments was liquidated. The assets were sold off for pennies on the dollar to pay the $28 million fine. Jada was sentenced to 8 years. My father got 5. My mother avoided prison, but she lost everything else. The mansion, the social standing, the friends who only loved her for her gala invites. She moved into a small condo downtown, stripped of the only identity she had ever known. It is fascinating to watch a dynasty collapse. You realize that for people like my parents, money isn't just currency. It is their personality. It is their spine. When you take it away, they don't just become poor, they become hollow. They had spent 40 years renting respect, and when the lease ran out, they had nothing intrinsic to stand on. Their collapse wasn't tragic. It was inevitable. They were empty suits, and gravity finally did its job. I didn't visit them. I didn't write. I was too busy building something real. I started my own firm, Verity Structures. We are small. We are boutique. We specialize in ethical construction and transparent auditing for nonprofits. I don't have a corner office in a glass tower. I work out of a converted loft with exposed brick and a team of 4 people who call me by my first name and challenge me when I'm wrong. I am not the fixer anymore. I am the builder. There is a misconception that cutting off your family leaves a hole in your life. It doesn't. It clears the rot so something healthy can grow. I learned that family isn't about whose blood runs in your veins. It is about who stands by you when the rain starts. It is behavior, not biology. I chose to build a life on truth, even if I had to pour the foundation alone. If you are holding on to a family that hurts you just because of blood, let go. The fall is scary, but the landing is freedom.